In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 14th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Nevada versus Utah State. Logan on a winter weeknight is not exactly a soft landing for anyone in this conference. You get that packed building up in the mountains, the band howling, the students sitting practically on the floor. And on top of that, you are staring at a ranked Utah State squad sitting at 14-1 overall, perfect in league play, and perfect at home so far. The resume looks shiny, the metrics love them, and it all feeds right into how the books have framed this. A big number, low double digits, Utah State treated like a mid-major wrecking ball, and Nevada cast as the extra in somebody else's blowout montage. It looks very simple on paper, but here is the thing. Once you strip away the glamour of the scorelines and look at how these two actually play possession by possession, this matchup is a lot friendlier to the roadside than that spread wants you to believe. Nevada is not walking in like some bottom feeder hoping to keep it respectable. They are sitting at 12-4 overall, 4-1 in the Mountain West, and they have carved out a style that tends to travel pretty well. They value the ball, they get to the line, and those two habits are like gold on the road. They are coughing it up under 9 times per game, which puts them among the stingiest ball-handling teams in the country, and they are living at the stripe with over 20 made free throws and close to 27 attempts a night. That is the exact type of formula that lets an underdog hang around while the favorite is busy trying to put on a show. You do not need a perfect game when you are constantly cashing in with the clock stopped and refusing to hand out free transition chances the other way. We just saw the top end of that Nevada script in the last one against Wyoming. 92 points on the board, 5 different guys in double figures, shooting in the low 60s from the field and the low 60s from deep, and doing it without having to play reckless or desperate. That is not a team that needs everything to go right just to sniff the number. That is a team that can punch back when the game turns into a shot-making contest. And deep down, that is what this one threatens to become. Utah State throwing haymakers with their offense, Nevada answering by running real half-court stuff, collapsing the defense, and forcing whistles instead of wild runouts. Honestly, if you like backing underdogs, that is exactly the emotional profile you want. Cold-blooded about the ball, very warm-blooded about contact. The fun twist here is how those Nevada strengths line up with Utah State's defensive personality. Utah State loves to be aggressive. They jump lanes, they swipe at the ball, they push for steals and momentum plays, and that has them among the best in the nation at forcing turnovers. The flip side is that kind of approach usually comes with a trade-off. You get the steals, but you also put opponents on the line at a higher clip. Drop a patient ball handling team that already leans into physical drives into that environment, and suddenly Utah State's aggression can turn into a steady free throw buffet for the visitors instead of a highlight reel of easy buckets the other way. It is the same story you see every season in spots like this. The favorite's strength looks scary until you realize it is also feeding right into what the dog wants to do. There is also that little emotional wrinkle sitting in the background that bettors tend to feel in their stomachs even if they do not say it out loud. Utah State is coming off that massive statement win at Boise, another comfortable double-digit beatdown to stretch a long win streak. The Aggies have been told for weeks that they are the grown-up in the room. Nevada, on the other hand, just took care of business against Wyoming after dealing with a rougher stretch and now walks back into the same building where they got smacked around last year in a 90-69 kind of game. That is classic revenge energy, circled on the board for months, against a favorite that has every reason to feel just a little too relaxed at home. Depth is another piece that quietly matters when you are talking about covering a big road number. Nevada has been getting real production from its bench all season, and when they win the bench points battle, their results follow. In that win over Wyoming, the second unit threw in 29 points, and you could feel how much that mattered once the whistles started stacking up and the game turned into a bit of a track meet rotation-wise. In a building where foul trouble is a very real possibility for either side, having a bench that can actually score instead of just survive is a big deal, especially when you are taking points. So when you zoom out and think through how this plays out, it is hard to picture a night where Utah State does not land some heavy punches. They are too good offensively to assume otherwise. But it is also easy to imagine a version of this game where Nevada just keeps walking forward, trip after trip. They handle the ball, they put pressure on the rim, they get to the stripe, they get real contributions from the bench, and they keep chipping away instead of going away. On the scoreboard, Utah State might absolutely look like the star, but on the betting sheet, you only need Nevada to keep hanging inside that big number for this to work. As our first pick for this matchup, the Nevada Wolfpack to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now, shifting over to the total, this number in the low 150s is basically a dare. It is the market asking you, do you really think these two are going to stay quiet on the scoreboard if they play anything close to their normal offensive selves? Utah State is the headliner from a scoring standpoint, averaging about 87 points a night and giving up around 67, and they do it with the kind of shooting profile that analytics people screenshot and send to their friends. They are lighting it up inside the arc, they are efficient from deep, and overall they sit among the absolute best in the country in how well they convert their looks. That is before you even talk about pace, because they do not need wild tempo to generate big numbers, they just need their usual rhythm. Recent form only leans harder in the same direction for the total. Utah State has been throwing up firework numbers game after game, mid to high 90s at home, 100 on Colorado State, and 93 on the road at Boise. That is not a one-off heater, that is a pattern of an offense that keeps humming regardless of the jersey on the other side. And it is not like those scores are squeaking over the closing numbers on some lucky final possession either, they are clearing the bar with room to spare. When a team is winning by those kinds of margins while regularly pushing into the 90s, total tickets start to sweat very early in the second half. Nevada is not just the supporting actor in this scoring script, and that matters when you are talking about an over. They are putting up just over 77 points per game. They are shooting right around 37% from three, and they are very comfortable at the line in the mid-70s. The recent trend has been even friendlier to offense. They found a way to crack a traditionally tough San Diego State defense for 78, then followed with 92 on Wyoming once their rotation smoothed out. That combination of spacing from deep and reliable free throw shooting is basically one giant neon sign pointing toward games that stay offensive unless something really weird happens. Stylistically, this matchup is kind of catnip for an over. Utah State's defense loves to hunt steals, they gamble for deflections and live ball turnovers, and that is exactly the kind of thing that either turns into easy transition points or into fouls when the ball handler is strong and willing to absorb contact. Nevada, as we already know, is one of the best in the country at turning pressure into trips to the stripe. They welcome that physicality. That is a recipe for a lot of stopped clock scoring, which is pretty much the dream scenario for anyone holding an over ticket. Points are going up while the seconds are not melting away. The pace does not even have to be frantic for this number in the low 150s to get tested. Utah State is operating at such a high level offensively that they can beat totals simply by being themselves, and Nevada does not need a track meet to keep up if their usual mix of threes and free throws shows up. You can also layer on the historical flavor for games in this building. When these teams get together in Logan, the scoreboard has had a strong tendency to lean high, with a big majority of recent meetings sailing past the total. Nothing about this year's version screams grind fest or slog. Both teams lean toward offensive comfort more than defensive stubbornness. Of course, there is always a universe where the under gets there. Maybe Utah State finally has an off night from deep. Maybe Nevada decides to slow things to a crawl and spends too much time dribbling air out of the ball. Or maybe both squads come out tight in a big conference spot. You also have to keep one eye on the number itself, because it has already shifted from an opener in the mid-150s down into the low 150s at some shops, and what looks like a solid over at one number can feel pretty dicey a couple of points higher. But if you put everything together, elite home shooting, a confident offensive underdog that just dropped 90+, whistle-friendly stylistic overlap, and a total that is now a bit cheaper than where it started, the most common story still has both sides putting together runs, free throws stacking up late, and the scoreboard sneaking past that number more often than it stalls out beneath it. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Arizona State versus Arizona. Rivalry nights in Tucson always feel a little louder, a little sharper, like the whole building has been waiting all week just to boo the team in maroon. You have Arizona State rolling in at 10-6 with a 1-2 mark in Big 12 play. trying to convince everyone that the win over Kansas State was the start of a reset and not just a quick break in the storm. Across from them, you have the #1 team in the country, Arizona, sitting at 16-0 overall and 3-0 in the league, still unbeaten at home and playing with the swagger of a group that knows every opponent is treating them like a measuring stick. Here is the thing, the oddsmakers are not being subtle. They are hanging a spread around Arizona needing to win by roughly 22 points to cash, which is their way of saying this is not a coin flip. This is, can Arizona turn a comfortable win into a full-on runaway? That kind of number does not come out of thin air. It comes from a profile where Arizona is piling up more than 91 points per game, winning by over 20 on average, and smashing teams on the glass while still looking like they have another gear when the moment actually calls for it. Arizona's style just wears on you. They push the pace, yes, but it is not just sprinting and launching. It is wave after wave of pressure, bodies on the glass, and a tempo that forces opponents to defend for long stretches and then immediately sprint back the other way. Most teams can hang with that for a half. Very few can stay composed against it for 40 minutes in front of a crowd that smells blood every time the league gets into the teens. Now look at Arizona State's recent road toward this game. They just snapped a 4-game losing streak by edging Kansas State 87-84 at home, and even that felt more like survival than dominance, with the Sun Devils needing a huge second half and heavy trips to the foul line to claw out of a hole. Before that win, their last 3 outings looked like this. They gave up 90 at home to Colorado, 104 at BYU in a blowout, and then that same 84 to Kansas State. So defensively, they are in a stretch where opponents are living very comfortably in the 80s and 90s, and in one case north of 100, which is not exactly how you want to roll into McKell against an offense that is already humming. Stylistically, that is where this gets tricky for Arizona State. Their best punch tends to show up in games that turn a bit chaotic, where they can string together energy runs, force a few turnovers, and feed off momentum. The problem is that Arizona is built to turn chaos into layup lines. If Arizona State is loose with the ball or forced into rush jumpers late in the clock, those misses and turnovers become instant fuel for Arizona's transition game. And once the Wildcats start stacking those 11-2 bursts, the scoreboard jumps in chunks, not in small steps. There is also the emotional layer. In rivalry games, the underdog often comes out flying, and you can absolutely imagine Arizona State landing a few early shots, maybe even playing this close for a chunk of the first half. But you also have a favorite that is still perfect on the season, used to responding every time someone swings at them. When that kind of team gets rolling, the crowd piles on, the pace stays uncomfortable, and the underdog suddenly has to hit tough contested shots just to avoid the scoreboard turning ugly. Over the course of 40 minutes, that is the kind of environment where a big spread can actually look small by the time you get inside the final 5 minutes. So when you blend all of that together, you are looking at an Arizona team that already wins big, that already defends at a much higher level than Arizona State, and that now gets its rival in its own building while the Sun Devils are in a defensive slump. That does not guarantee anything, of course, but it does tilt the probabilities toward this feeling a lot more like another statement night from the #1 team than backdoor rivalry nail-biter. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arizona Wildcats to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now let us talk about the total, because that number is loud all by itself. The books have set this thing in the high 160s, 169.5, which is essentially a neon sign that says, "We are expecting offense, and a lot of it." That projection is built on a few obvious truths. Arizona scores in bunches, they are above 91 per game, and Arizona State's recent box scores suggest their games have turned into track meets, whether they planned on that or not. On paper, it is easy to imagine people gravitating to the idea of a shootout. You see Arizona dropping 97, 99, 101, 107 in recent wins, and you see Arizona State involved in 95-89 and 104-76 type games, and your brain immediately goes, why not 100-80? Scoreboard watching can be persuasive like that, but totals at this height are asking for a very specific kind of game, and they do not hit as casually as those final scores make them look. Here is the subtle part that sometimes gets missed. Rivalry games crank up the emotional volume, but that does not always mean more scoring. Sometimes it actually pulls in the opposite direction. Every possession starts to matter a little more. Coaches tighten rotations for stretches, especially when the game is still in reach, and both sides become more deliberate about what they will and will not live with. If Arizona State wants any chance of hanging around, at some point they have to cool the tempo, get back in transition, and keep this from becoming a full-court race that exposes their defense again. From Arizona's perspective, there is another layer. Yes, they are comfortable running, but they also know Arizona State just gave up an average in the mid-90s to their last 3 opponents, so they do not have to play recklessly to find scoring. They can pick their spots, punish mismatches, and lean on physicality without needing to jack up the pace on every trip. If this turns into a game where Arizona controls the rhythm, keeps Arizona State off the free throw line for easy points, and limits those wild sequences of back and forth threes, the scoring total starts to creep down from that extreme tier the odds makers are dangling. There is also the scoreboard dynamic of a big spread to think about. In a game where one side is favored by more than 20, there is a very real scenario where the result on the side is more or less settled with several minutes left. Once that happens, coaches start thinking about minutes, health, and the long season ahead. Starters sit a little earlier. Bench groups run more clock. Defenses are still playing, but offenses are not exactly hunting heat-check threes in the final 2 minutes just to make the total look pretty. Those last few possessions that mean everything to a total do not always carry the same urgency inside the actual huddle. And if you think through what it would take to fly over a number that high, you are basically asking for Arizona to stay near its usual offensive level and for Arizona State to both score efficiently and avoid those long, ugly droughts they have shown on the road against top teams. Can that happen? Sure, on a perfect shooting night. But in a high-pressure rivalry environment, against a defense that has already shown it can hold good offenses well below their comfort zone, it is a big ask to expect both teams to keep firing cleanly for 40 straight minutes. All of that leans toward a game that can still feel lively, still have big Arizona runs, and still have some fireworks, but that lands a shade lower than the lofty projection the market is daring people to chase. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Michigan versus Washington. This matchup has that classic feel of a statement game, not just a random weeknight on the schedule. You have a Michigan team that has been steamrolling opponents, hopping on planes, walking into gyms, and treating every arena like it is a neutral court with their name on the marquee. Across from them, Washington is tough at home, scrappy, emotional, and a little unpredictable, the kind of team that can look like a problem for 10 minutes and then suddenly remember why they are the underdog. So the real question is not just who wins, it is whether Michigan's identity travels so well that the number on this spread becomes more of a formality than a debate. Michigan's identity this season is built on pressure without panic. They score at a pace where 90 points honestly feels normal, but the way they get there is what matters for the spread. They do not need wild shot-making streaks to separate. They move the ball, attack early in the clock, and then punish you on the glass when you survive the first shot. They are one of the absolute top offenses in the country in both raw scoring and efficiency, and that combination is the nightmare for an underdog trying to just hang around. If you defend the first action, they hit you with a second action, then a third, and if all of that fails, the rebound turns into another layup or an open three. Here is the thing that really leans this toward a favorite cover rather than a tense one-possession sweat. On the other side, Washington can absolutely play fast and fun, but they are not nearly as trustworthy possession to possession. Their season profile screams volatility. They can score in bunches, yes, but they give a lot of it back on the other end with defensive lapses, missed box outs, and stretches where the rotation is patchwork because of all the bumps and bruises they are dealing with. In a short burst, that makes them dangerous. Across 40 minutes against a machine like Michigan, it makes them fragile. You also have the physical piece that does not show up in a simple box score. Michigan is one of the best rebounding teams in the country, and specifically one of the best at ending your possession right then and there. You get one shot, maybe, and then you are jogging back while they are already organizing a fast break. That kind of gap on the glass often does not just help you win, it helps you win by margin. If Washington needs second chances and Michigan simply refuses to give them, every empty possession stretches the rope a little tighter for the home side. And once you zoom out and think about game flow, the picture leans even more toward the favorite. Washington's path to covering usually involves Michigan stumbling, getting dragged into a sloppy game, or letting the crowd turn this into a chaotic rock fight. Michigan has not really lived in that world this season. They have played big brands, in loud buildings, and they have carried the same core style into every gym. Depth also helps here. Even if Washington keeps it close for a while, Michigan can keep throwing waves of production at a shorter, more patched-together rotation. That is often where a cover is born, not in the first 10 minutes, but in the final 12 when one team is still sprinting and the other is hanging on. As our first pick for this matchup, the Michigan Wolverines to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now let us talk about that total, because that number hanging above this game is not shy. When people see Michigan on the board, they immediately think track meet, and Washington's scoring profile helps sell that idea too. You see two offenses that can both clear 80 on the right night, and it is very easy to mentally turn this into a late-night Big Ten shootout where nobody gets a stop. But totals are more about how the game is going to be played than about raw averages, and this particular matchup has a sneaky chance to be played on Michigan's terms, not on the scoreboard's fantasy. Michigan scores a ton, but they do it with control. They are not just racing up and down like a pickup game. They are efficient, they value shots, and they choke off second chances on the other end. That combination quietly drags the total down more than people realize. If you grab almost every defensive board, you erase the long scramble possessions that usually juice an over. You turn misses into calm, organized offense rather than frantic, up and down chaos. On the Washington side, the injury picture and rotation juggling matter a lot for the total. When you are not fully healthy, you do not really want a true 90-possession sprint, even if the crowd is begging for it. There is a natural tendency to slow down a little, to manage minutes, to protect bigs from foul trouble, and to be more deliberate in the half court. They can still score, they can still heat up, but you get more choppy stretches, more empty trips, and more sequences where both teams are walking the ball up and calling sets. Those stretches are where a high total quietly starts slipping under instead of sailing over. Conference play and context also nudge this game towards something a shade more measured. Scouting is sharper now, there is plenty of film, and both coaching staffs know what the other wants to do in space. You tend to see more targeted game plans, more effort to take away early actions, and more possessions that need a second or third option just to get a decent look. If one side builds a comfortable cushion later in the second half, you also get that familiar effect where the team in front starts using more clock. The trailing team forces things, and the last few minutes produce more dribbles than points. That kind of finish might still look entertaining on screen, but it is not usually friendly to a very inflated total. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. TCU versus BYU. BYU walks into this one feeling like the loud kid at recess who finally realizes everyone else is a little scared of them, and honestly, that is kind of the vibe here in Provo. They have 15-1-0 on the record line. They are sitting comfortably in the national rankings, and they are coming off that emotional rivalry win at Utah, where they handled late-game pressure on the road like a veteran group. TCU, on the other hand, flies in with 11-5-0, and the whole country just watched them cough up a huge lead at Kansas in a game that turned into a case study in how not to close. So right away, the mental edge leans toward the team that has been finishing games, not the one replaying missed free throws in their heads on the plane ride to Utah. Here is the thing about this matchup. It is less about which team can play well and more about which one can survive its own worst tendencies for 40 minutes. TCU is good enough to beat almost anyone when the ball is popping and the threes are falling. We literally just saw them light up Allen Fieldhouse for 100 points, but their margin for error shrinks a lot in a place like the Marriott Center. Turnovers late, shaky decision-making, and a slight wobble in half-court structure showed up in that Kansas collapse, and those are exactly the kinds of cracks that get ripped wide open when you are dealing with altitude, noise, and a crowd that lives for momentum swings. BYU, by contrast, is built to squeeze those little cracks. They throw multiple ball handlers at you, they space the floor with shooting, and they can play through several different creators without having to lean on one guy to be heroic every trip. A Jay Dibansa warps the defense just by existing. Richie Saunders is the kind of senior wing who makes the smart play on autopilot, and Robert Wright III controls tempo in a way that keeps the Cougars from getting rushed even when the building is going wild. That makes it a lot harder for TCU to force this into the chaotic, turnover-heavy track meet that usually fuels their best nights. Now layer in the front court situation, because that quietly matters as much as any trend on the betting sheet. TCU lost Malik Diallo for the season with a torn ACL, which already forced them to rewire their interior rotation, and there have been questions about Vianney Salachum's availability as well, so the Frogs are asking a lot from David Punch and Xavier Edmonds in terms of physical minutes and foul discipline. BYU's bigs are not just big bodies, they are part of a system that keeps coming in waves, with Kiba Keita anchoring the interior and newer piece Abdullah Ahmed giving them another rim protector and lob target who makes life miserable for smaller lineups that try to go light to keep up with Diabantissa and Saunders on the perimeter. On top of that, BYU has already been stress-tested in the backcourt by injuries and still kept humming, which quietly says a lot about their floor in a game like this. They have lost Nate Pickens for the season. Dawson Baker is also out long-term with a major knee injury, and KJ Perry is redshirting, so there is no illusion here that they are overflowing with extra guards. Yet the offense has not slipped off its pace, which tells you how sturdy the structure is, not just the names. TCU has the kind of scrappy, everything-to-gain profile you like in a spoiler, but they bring that into the largest arena in the Big 12, at altitude, against a team that has made a habit of turning short spurts into knockout runs in this building. So if this closes inside a couple of possessions late, it will probably be because BYU let off the gas, not because TCU suddenly solved its late-game issues from Lawrence overnight. As our first pick for this matchup, the BYU Cougars to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Odds makers hanging a total number in the mid-150s like 156.5 are basically daring you to believe both offenses will show up. And honestly, these two have played enough up-tempo, high-scoring basketball that the dare does not feel crazy at all. BYU is living in that neighborhood of 88 points per game, winning by massive margins when the threes fall, and TCU is comfortably in the 80s or close to it on their better nights, as that 100-point outing at Kansas loudly reminded everyone. You put that kind of scoring profile in altitude with a home team that loves to run and a visiting team that just proved it will keep pushing even in a hostile building, and you can see why the total is sitting where it is. Here is where it gets fun for overbackers. The way these teams create offense actually feeds volume as much as efficiency. BYU leans into pace with quick decisions and early threes, but they are not reckless. It is more like an NBA-style read-and-react system where a semi-open shot is a green light if the ball has already touched a couple of sides. That means you get a lot of possessions where the Cougars either get a clean look from deep or they force a long closeout, which opens up drives and kickouts, and that chain tends to end in a shot long before the clock gets close to single digits. TCU, for its part, leans into a different path to the same destination. They pressure passing lanes, try to turn defense into quick offense, and rely on a lot of players touching the ball and being willing shooters, so when they are locked in, their games can snowball into shootouts almost by habit. And we have already seen that when TCU's offense is feeling it, they do not exactly slow down just because the situation looks comfortable on the scoreboard. That Kansas game was a reminder that they will keep firing threes and pushing even when they are ahead, which backfired in terms of the result, but not for people holding high totals, since the game still landed at a combined 204 points. Throw that team into a game where they are chasing BYU rather than nursing a lead, and you get a script that naturally leans toward more possessions, more threes, and more free throws as they try to claw back if the Cougars make one of their typical third-quarter style runs in the second half. You can also expect the whistle to nudge the scoring upward rather than drag it down. BYU's downhill attacking and TCU's tendency to reach and grab when their half-court defense breaks are the kind of ingredients that usually show up as a steady parade to the line over 40 minutes, especially if the game drifts toward a double-digit margin and the trailing side has to extend things with fouls late. So even if one stretch goes a little cold, the combination of pace, shot volume, and free throws gives this matchup several different ways to climb over a lofty number rather than relying on a single perfect shooting night from either side. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Duke versus California. This matchup feels like a clash between a team that knows exactly who it is and a team that is just figuring out how good it can be. Duke walks into Berkeley with a 15-1 overall mark and a 4-0 record in Atlantic Coast Conference play, sitting comfortably inside the national top tier and winning by around 20 points a night on the scoreboard. That is not just Duke's talented noise. It is a pattern where their offense keeps humming and their defense rarely gives you the kind of prolonged opening you need to hang inside a big number. They have already gone into true road environments at Florida State and Louisville and walked out with wins by 4 and 11, and they just handled a ranked SMU team by 7 in Cameron, which is the kind of three-game stretch that tells you this group travels, adjusts, and still finds separation late in games. Here is the thing. The market is asking whether Cal can keep this inside a pretty hefty spread against that kind of machine, not whether Cal is good. Cal is 13-4 overall, 1-3 in their new Atlantic Coast Conference life, and a ridiculous 12-1 at Haas Pavilion, so this is not some anonymous underdog hoping for a miracle. They have stacked real wins in that building, including high-energy results like 93-65 over Cal State Fullerton, 91-67 against Sacramento State, and 97-50 on Morgan State, plus statement-level performances against names like Kansas State, UCLA, Utah, and Pacific. Honestly, if you just watched Cal at home without seeing the name on the jerseys, you would think you were looking at a comfortably ranked team that expects to score in the high 70s or low 80s every night. But when you zoom in on how these two teams create margin, you start to see why the favorite is getting so much respect. Duke is living in that 86.8 scored to 66.6 allowed world, with almost 50% shooting from the field and mid-30s from three, plus a steady flow of made free throws that turns every whistle into extra points. They also share the ball at a high level, piling up close to 18 assists a game while keeping their own turnovers down in a way that produces a clean 1.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio, which is exactly how you build those sudden 12-0 runs that blow games open. Cal, on the other hand, has an efficient offense on paper, sitting around 79.8 points per game with mid-40s shooting, plenty of made threes, and almost 18 made free throws per night at nearly 80%, but they are not quite as tidy with the ball and they do not win the turnover battle as consistently. So you get this contrast where Duke's wins often feel like a slow squeeze that turns into a comfortable cushion, while Cal's success leans more on shot-making surges and home energy, which can be spectacular but a little bit more volatile. Let me explain why that matters against a double-digit number. Cal's best path to hanging close is a night where their offense looks like it did against those early home visitors, hitting threes, living at the line, and turning Haas into a pressure cooker for a blue blood playing a morning body clock game on the West Coast. The problem is that we have already seen what happens when a physically overwhelming, top-level Atlantic Coast Conference roster walks into that building and keeps its composure. Louisville came in and walked out with a 90-70 win, and that was against a Cal team that still shot it decently and got to 70 points. Duke is built in a similar, we can score and we can smother you for stretches, mold, and they have been doing it against a tougher set of opponents on a more regular basis. If this game plays out 10 times, there will absolutely be versions where Cal's shot-making, crowd, and travel weirdness drag Duke into something tight, but much more often you get a script where Duke's size, depth, and shooting gradually wear down the Bears and the margin widens as the second half moves along. So while the spread is not small and this is not a neutral floor, the combination of Duke's proven blowout profile, their recent road form in hostile Atlantic Coast Conference gyms, and Cal's tendency to wobble when the opponent can both match their scoring and raise the defensive ceiling points us toward trusting the ranked favorite to land in front of the number more often than not in this spot. As our first pick for this matchup, the Duke Blue Devils to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The books are hanging a high total number for a reason, and it starts with the simple fact that both of these offenses are used to playing games that land nowhere near the rock fight category. Duke's average scoreboard is basically mid-80s for them and mid-60s for their opponents, and that is not padded by one or two wild outliers. It is driven by a long run of games where they comfortably break 80 while their opponent still sneaks into the 70s or upper 60s. Cal, meanwhile, is living right around 80 points per night, and if you look at the shape of their season, their home games in particular tend to turn into track meets on the scoreboard, with totals like 99-96 against Kansas State, 80-72 versus UCLA, 91-67 versus Sacramento State, and 97-50 against Morgan State. Here is the fun part. These are not grinded out, walk the ball up, use 27 seconds of clock on every trip teams. Both shoot a healthy number of threes, both get to the free throw line often, and both are comfortable playing in the kind of open floor that rewards teams that can run, spot up, and punish defensive mistakes. From a total perspective, that is what you want, because every extra possession, every early clock three, and every foul on a shooter nudges the game a little closer to those big combined numbers you see on the board. Think about the most likely scoring shapes. If Duke plays to their average and gets somewhere in that low to mid-80s range, that alone puts a lot of pressure on any total that is not aggressively high. Cal does not have to be perfect offensively to hold up their end. They have already shown they can get into the mid to high 70s and even beyond that against quality opposition, especially in this building, and they do it in ways that translate against top defenses with threes, rim pressure, and free throws. You also have a setup where if Duke pulls ahead by any meaningful margin, Cal is going to respond with quicker shots, more threes, and lineups tilted toward offense, and that style of chasing from behind tends to inflate totals rather than suppress them. On the flip side, what does an undergame look like? It probably involves Duke deciding to put their foot down defensively, forcing long, empty possessions from Cal, and playing a little more slowly with a comfortable lead, or a night where Cal's shooting simply abandons them and the Bears stare at something in the low 60s. Those outcomes are not impossible, and it is worth saying that any single college game can skew strange if whistles dry up or if both teams open ice cold. But when you line up the full season scoring profiles against the style of play and the environment, you are still left with a matchup that leans toward a game living in a higher scoring band rather than a slog. So, even acknowledging that the number is not cheap and that variance is always part of totals betting, the combination of Duke's relentless offense, Cal's home scoring history, the three-point volume on both sides, and the real possibility of extended late-game fouling if this lands near the spread nudges this toward the more explosive script on the scoreboard more often than not. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.